Hi there, I'm Mike Coe. What's your open interest? Got a question or a comment? Send me a tweet at Michael_Coe and I will try to answer it. So this actually isn't a question so much, probably more of a comment. Back on April 16th, Carter and I outlined a buy right in AT&T, specifically the June 31 buy right. So what is that trade? Just to go back in time so we know what we're talking about. A buy right is when you buy a stock and then you sell or write calls against it. In this case, the June 31 calls. At the time, the stock was trading around $29.95, and the June 31 calls were about 50 cents. As of today's close, AT&T is about $28.96, so a nearly dollar loss on those shares, and those calls are trading for about 16 cents. Now, an important point. Obviously, we've had some pretty big news. The thesis at the time was that it was a mature company, it wasn't a growth company, paid a big dividend, and that would create some measure of support for the stock. Probably wasn't going to be anything too transformative, but it was sort of a buy and hold investment, and you could enhance your returns by selling upside calls on the shares to give yourself a little bit more yield. Obviously, we've had a lot of news come out since then because AT&T has decided that the mega merger that they had with Time Warner several years ago didn't end up producing the new media distribution paradigm shifting company that they thought it would. There were some, I think, who questioned that deal at the time. I think there's a lot of people who have a lot of questions about it now, since only a few years later, they're looking at spinning those investments off in the deal that they announced with Discovery. So the stock sort of shot up very briefly thereafter, but then it came back. One of the byproducts of all of this is that the company is deciding to focus its investments on 5G build-out, which I think makes some sense. But of course, that is going to require significant capital investment. The consequence of that is that they are reducing their dividend payout ratio from about 55% down to the low 40s. And that means there's going to be a dividend cut. So previously yielding about 7%. Right now, if we're guessing that it's about 36 cents per quarter is the dividend expectation for the future. At the current approximately $29 stock price, that means that the shares are going to be yielding about 5%. What does that mean for options holders? Well, all else equal. So if implied volatility remains the same, the time to expiration remains the same, the share price remains the same. If a dividend is lower, all else equal, the value of upside calls goes up and the value of downside puts goes down. So if you hold these shares, I would look to cover those June 31 calls when they get below a dime, which is probably going to happen pretty soon. And you can continue, I think, to sell covered calls against it. I think a dividend cut could put a little bit of pressure on the stock for the time being, because people who held it for income, some of those folks might not be quite as interested in it. Some of the people who are going in and chasing the fat dividend as it previously existed, still fat at 5%, but not as, might not be creating quite the level of support that the stock previously held. So overall, trade is down, about 65 cents or thereabouts, mark to market as I speak to you now. But I still think that this is a stock that you can own, not for substantial growth, but for a dividend as a longer term investment, expecting very modest growth, very modest share price appreciation. But the upside calls are probably going to be a little bit higher priced. And so I think you can continue to hold and continue to use this as an opportunity to collect dividends and collect yield in the form of upside call sales. So I hope that answers that comment. What is your open interest? If you have a question or a comment you'd like me to address it, I'd be happy to. Tweet me at Michael_Coe. Also, you can follow me on YouTube and subscribe to us there, and I will try to respond to your questions when I can.